I was born on the 4th of July. I had the self-image of being an all-American boy.
I didn't think anything other than American. And then all of a sudden, I'm not an American. I'm nothing.
December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy.
After December 7, Japan declared we were not Japanese. America said our loyalty was suspect. Our army said we don't trust you. We cannot be trusted. So we were men without a country.
I felt so bad about being born a Japanese.
And then they were trying to form a Japanese-American unit, and they were calling for volunteers. And at that time, I put my name in right away.
This is the story of the Nisei soldier, American-born men of Japanese descent, who served in the United States Army during World War II. After Pearl Harbor, newspapers ran stories that created a climate of paranoia that eventually led to one of the greatest violations of civil rights in American history. It was during this period that the Nisei, or second-generation Japanese Americans, would step forward to prove their loyalty. They earned the respect of all those who fought beside them, and through their actions, those who questioned their loyalty were compelled to re-examine what it means to be an American.
On the day I departed, my father said, if it means you must give your life for it, so be it, but do so with honor.
So on December 7th, about before 8 o'clock, I was having breakfast with my parents.
I was in the army already. So they gave us leave on Sunday, and we were making a fence in our yard.
I was on duty from 6 o'clock to 8 o'clock. I had my rifle, all real bullets, got in Schofield Barracks, my section.
As we always do on Sunday, early in the morning, the whole family is up getting ready for church.
So we were having hot cakes Sunday morning when I heard the noise, bang, 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 bang.
And I could see the bombs falling, all smoke, all, this side burning.
While I was deliberating what was that, I heard boom, boom, boom. I saw a dive bomber come from the Honolulu direction and hit into the Arizona battleship Roll. And I saw the pilot drop this torpedo. And instead of going up where he can get hit by anti-aircraft, he hugged the surface of the water and came directly at me. And at that point, I was more interested in seeing the face of the pilot.
I felt that my life had come to an end at that point, because obviously the pilot in that plane looked like me.
Our American soldiers who were stationed in Waikiki, they looked at us as though we were the enemy, screamed their hatred at us. And I never felt so helpless as at that moment.
There was all kinds of rumors that the plantation workers went out in the cane field and caught a SWAT, like an arrow pointed to Pearl Harbor. There was sabotage at the electric plant, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, they hear rumors, they got all excited. They said, we're gonna revolt.
They told us, all you guys of Japanese ancestry turn in their rifle. So we all turned in our rifle. And then we went back to Schofield. And one of my lieutenants was some Chinese guy, but he was brought up in Shanghai. He cried,
FBI director, his name was Shiver, investigated all these rumors for a long time, and they made an announcement that there was not a single case of sabotage or espionage by residents, Japanese American or Issei residents living in Hawaii. So the people of Hawaii were exonerated in terms of all these rumors.
I will never forget that Sunday morning when over the radio came these announcements in almost a hysterical voice. The Japanese planes that bombed Pearl Harbor. This is no kidding. This is real.
Right away, the papers all mentioned Japs. A neighborhood store that we used to always do our shopping, all of a sudden came up with a sign saying, "No Japs."
More than that, I was worried, what the heck was I going to do about going back to school the following day, because I knew that there'd be finger pointing at school.
I also had a Chinese American friend, good friend of mine, who came into my laboratory section with this big button on his shirt, Chinese American, with the cross flags of China and the United States. I don't blame him, I wouldn't want to take a chance on getting beaten up on the streets of Los Angeles at that time.
The principal got all the students of the school to go out to the football field, and he told everybody that what happened, and that the Japanese Americans were not responsible for the bombing, and that everything must go on as normal as possible.
There is certain fairness about Americans that I felt that I could rely on. So I didn't feel that there would be any kind of unreasonable action taken against me.
Within 3 months of Pearl Harbor, President Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9066, and over 100,000 Japanese Americans on the West Coast were ordered into temporary assembly centers. They were allowed to bring only what they could carry by hand. This meant that many personal items would be left behind. For many, the order gave them less than 2 weeks to arrange for their relocation.
Knowing that my father was gone and my mother didn't know what the future was going to hold, and she didn't want those beautiful Japanese dolls of mine to get either buggy or somebody mistreating them. So we sat by the furnace and threw them in the furnace one by one. It just broke my heart.
The name was Husky. It was an Eskimo dog. And the dog must have sensed it or something. Something was wrong, I hate to leave him behind.
I guess at that stage, I wasn't constitutionally wise, like some people claim they were. I thought the best thing I could do was to obey what they told us to do.
It was just a long line of people, and surprisingly, the men had suits on, the ladies had hats. We were like all dressed to go someplace nice. We all we didn't look like any casual bunch of people. It's a sinking feeling, however, because you just left everything behind. My parents lost their house, lost their car, lost everything.
We were told that we had to, dispose of everything that we had to dispose and go into an assembly center.
Those places were temporary. Generally, most of the permanent camps are still being built, so that was a temporary holding area. As far as Tanforan was concerned, it's formerly a racetrack.
If you know what a horse stall is, it's just probably a 10-foot wide, maybe 20 feet deep, and it was just kind of swept out, and it looked like it was kind of painted whitewash, but of course the odors were still there.
Our principal, Mr. Trathen, he looked like such a mean, unfriendly man. And so I was shocked when in the camp, at graduation time, he drove all the way to Puyallup to hand us our diplomas. So we were in this grandstand, you know, where the horse races are. And I just couldn't believe it. I didn't think he was that nice or cared, you know. But he came and he was smiling and, you know, just as nice as he could be. And I think that impressed me more than anything.
Japanese Americans were being displaced out of their homes in Washington, Oregon, California, and parts of Arizona. They were being held in nearby assembly centers, most of which were horse racetracks. Eventually, 10 permanent internment camps across the United States were constructed, and the Japanese Americans were moved to these camps.
The wind was blowing, the sand was whipping up, you know. It's like a desert there, really.
The barracks that they built were made out of green wood, so the little knots would fall out when the thing dried out.
And there'd be maybe a quarter-inch, you know, line of air coming through, and the sand would just blow in, and there was no way you can stop the sand from coming in.
You're put into a small unit, and you have to use sheets or blankets as partition.
You could hear people crying. You can hear people talking. There was absolutely no privacy at all.
Ate in the common mess hall. The food was just passable. And the washing situation, you know, there are no washrooms or anything out there in the barracks. There's just a common washroom and a common latrine room.
So it was sort of quite a change for us, especially in bad weather, you know, when you have to walk through cold weather and you know, the ground's muddy.
After being in the internment camps for almost a year, everyone in the camps over the age of 18 was forced to complete a loyalty questionnaire. For many, this questionnaire became the most controversial event of the entire internment experience. 2 questions in particular became the focal point of the controversy. Question 27 asked if the internee would serve in the military. Those who were of age questioned how they could serve when they were still classified 4C, enemy aliens. Question 28 asked the internees to swear unqualified allegiance to the United States and forswear allegiance to the Japanese emperor. By answering yes, they felt it would be admitting an allegiance to Japan that they never had. There was also a fear that answering differently from family members would lead them to having parents separated from their children. As it turned out, those who did not answer yes to both of these questions were branded disloyal.
People raised the question about why would they ask us such questions when we're American citizens?
When you were thrown from a free life into a camp without a trial, and just thrown in there by your government, they have taken your freedom away from you. This is a freedom that is inside of you, and the only way I can explain it is like somebody taking a knife and cutting your heart out. And you can't explain it. And you fight for the rest of your life trying to get it back.
Following Pearl Harbor, many Americans were eager to volunteer for the military. However, the government had classified Japanese Americans 4C, or enemy aliens. Except for those already in the military, no Japanese Americans would be accepted into the armed forces. The U.S. and Japan were about to engage in the Battle of Midway. A loss by the United States would provide the Japanese with a base from which they could launch an invasion of the U.S. West Coast. The U.S. government came to discover that over half of the members of the Hawaiian National Guard were of Japanese ancestry. These men from Hawaii were already in the military prior to the bombing of Pearl Harbor. The government, not knowing if they could depend on the Nisei in an attack by the Japanese, separated them from the other soldiers, and then made the decision to remove them from the Hawaiian Islands. They arrived in Camp McCoy, Wisconsin. They were given the name the 100th Infantry Battalion Separate. The men chose for themselves the motto, "Remember Pearl Harbor." The arbitrary nature of their designation, 100, emphasized the fact that the Army didn't know what to do with them. The 100th, or one Puka Puka, as the men from Hawaii called themselves, achieved a remarkable training record while at Camp McCoy. By the beginning of 1943, the Army, still not knowing what to do with them, sent them to Camp Shelby in the segregated southern state of Mississippi.
Barrett Turner came in, and I reported to him, reporting for duty, and he said, "I'll have you transferred immediately." And I said, "Well, I just got here. Why am I being transferred?" He says, "In case you don't know, the unit are Japanese and you're Korean, and coming from the islands, I know the Koreans and Japanese don't always get along. And so that's the reason." I said, "No," I said, "you're wrong." I said, "They're Americans and I'm American, and we're going to go fight for America."
After breaking many training records at Camp Shelby, the 100th Battalion was finally sent to Europe to fight in the war in September of 1943. 1,300 men strong, the 100th would eventually come to the attention of General Mark Clark of the Fifth Army. The men from Hawaii, who were so eager to fight, intrigued General Clark. The 100th would be sent to southern Italy, where they would join the Fifth Army's push towards Rome. A major obstacle to the liberation of Rome was Monte Cassino. The Germans occupied the monastery overlooking the town of a casino and the valley below. Because of the historic significance and the treasures said to be inside, the Allies were required to attack the Germans without causing any damage to the monastery. Along the valley floor, the Rapido River was a natural barrier that sat between Cassino and the Allies on the eastern side of the valley. German engineers had months to prepare their defenses before the Allies attempted their assault.
What the Germans did was a very simple thing. They went up to the east side of the Rapido River. They dammed it, busted the wall, and flooded the whole valley.
At that time, it was just like a mud flat. The Germans had cut down the trees, so you got no cover.
What the German engineering companies had done, they come out and air hammered these bunkers into solid rock, and the Germans are sitting in there comfortably with their machine guns available fire and everything else.
The Allies were planning a frontal assault across the open valley, while other forces headed into the mountains behind the monastery. With B Company in reserve, A and C Company of the 100th had made it across the valley flats.
That night at midnight, we got a call from the regimental commander, and he told us to commit B Company to make an assault at dawn across that flat.
It was impossible for us to accomplish anything during the day, but then they said, "No, you go across. This is the order."
They went past my outpost, crossed the highway, and into this flat area.
During broad daylight, B Company was advancing across the valley flats under cover of a smokescreen. Suddenly, the wind changed direction, exposing the men of B Company.
So I remember one guy told us, "Go back." We didn't know what he meant. We said, "Go back, go back." What he meant was we're gonna hit a hell over there.
They were getting shot at, and mortars were dropping out. I could see the mortars bursting all around.
All of a sudden, the bullets flying. Oh, we had to just duck,
I had 5 officers and 46 men. When we went across, we ended up with 3 officers and 11 men. The rest of them were wounded or killed.
We are now given the job of capturing the castle. The castle was a major terrain feature because it controlled the only road to the monastery. We were able to get to the walls of the castle, but we were so reduced in strength, we couldn't take it.
We had no choice, but Washington, D.C. gave orders to the commanding American forces that, okay, let's bomb the place.
They told us to move back because the bombers coming.
So the bombers came and the bombs fell one after another, and they flattened the whole abbey.
The Allies attacked Monte Cassino by air and dropped 600 tons of explosives until the 1,800-year-old monastery was utterly destroyed. 5 months after the 34th Division, including the 100th Battalion, had pulled out, the Allies continued their aerial assault. 5 fresh divisions, along with artillery firing 200,000 shells, finally drove the Germans out of the remains of Cassino. News of the devastating casualties reached the families of the 100th back in Hawaii. The Purple Heart Medal is awarded to those who are either wounded or killed in action. If the soldier had died in battle, their families would receive the Purple Heart in honor of their sacrifice. The extremely high casualty rates suffered by the 100th in their attacks on Cassino earned them the nickname the Purple Heart Battalion. Eventually, the government would lift the 4C, enemy alien classification, off the Nisei. This opened the door for volunteers and draftees to follow in the footsteps of the 100th Battalion.
The Army came into the camps asking for volunteers to form an all-Japanese-American combat team.
If we remain in the internment camp and did nothing, and the war ends, where do we go to? What are we from now? Are we going to be like it was before, or even worse? Maybe a third-class citizen. Maybe we were a second-class citizen, but now it will be a third-class citizen. It would forever be branded for people not being loyal. So the only thing we thought was we had to serve.
My brother and I came back. The other 2 or 3 kids that were with us also came back, and their parents found out that here my brother and I had volunteered, and you ought to see all hell broke loose. The people start saying, "What's the matter with you people? Here you claimed you're an American citizen and you're no better than we are. You're in the same camp that we are, and now you're saying you're going to volunteer. And you have parents in Japan. What are they going to say?" And my thought was, I told him, I says, you know, the reason why we're here is that we don't have any past record where the Nihonjins or Japanese could prove their loyalty. Now's our chance. And if we don't take this chance and do something about it, it's going to be our fault. And, you know, some of us are not going to come back. But, you know, if that will... I don't know, every time I think about this thing. But I felt that, you know, if that would change things for the better for the Japanese, you know, it'd be worth it.
In Hawaii, the boys were also ineligible for the military. And then the Army went to Hawaii asking for volunteers. The boys were not put into camps. They were with their families. They were with the jobs that they had. It was just that they were not eligible for the military. Now they were made to be eligible. So you had a big turnout of boys from Hawaii to join.
According to the newspaper, President Roosevelt said they will accept 1,500 volunteers, you know, for combat duty. So over 10,000 of us volunteered.
When the Hawaiians came over, everybody had a nickname. I mean, some guys calling a guy Papoose. Now, who the hell is Papoose? We know. Who was Big Boy? see, or short stuff, or weird names. And it didn't fit the guy. I mean, the guy with the called Big Boy wasn't big. The guy Papoose was. He was small. They had real names, and I said, that's a lot better for me, because I hate like hell to pronounce your Japanese names. How in the hell are we ever going to pronounce these names?
When we first went to Camp Shelby, the cadre or the enlisted men who had stripes, they were almost all mainland sergeants. This was one of the reasons the Hawaii boys and mainland boys, from the very beginning, didn't hit it right.
They thought they were going to come in there and all be the sergeants and the non-coms to start with. And the officers that came with them, like Bert Nishamura and the rest of them, they thought they were all going to be company commanders. Well, that didn't happen. We were all set up.
And of course, there was this language barrier, pidgin English talking with a guy who spoke like a Haole, so there was all kind of fights.
They never knew what we were talking about anyhow, our language, because we use, Hawaiian, Japanese, whatever, Filipino, all comes in, so-called pidgin.
Usually it comes in a phrase, go stego, I come by. Means you go ahead and I'll catch up with you.
I remember one time a sergeant telling me, hey, Shimada, go come. I said, Sergeant, what do you like me I do, go or come?
And the first time I heard such a real heavy Hawaiian accent. So I had to ask him about 2-3 times, what was the password again? And I finally said, can you spell it for me? Oh, he got mad. Bakatari.
As soon as they say something, already ready to fight, because they feel like they were criticizing, or they felt like they were looked down on.
And one of the reasons they didn't like the mainland guys is because they represented all the things that they didn't like in a plantation owner. They hated plantation owners. And anybody that even resembled or looked like or acted like a plantation owner, they didn't like. They were going to be against that. And I had all the attributes of a plantation owner, and so they hated me.
I recall Colonel Pence, the commanding officer of the 442nd, calling out the entire group. And what he brought it down to was, if you boys can't get along here together, here in Mississippi, how the hell are you going to fight together when you get out in combat?
But then Chaplain Yamada finally decided that maybe these Hawaii boys better go to Jerome and Roar and see where their parents are and where they came from.
There was a certain amount of animosity for a while, until they learned about the internment camps. And when they visited the internment camp up in like, for example, Senator Dan Inouye, he was one of the first ones that went up there and visited him.
All of a sudden, each company in the regiment began receiving invitations from Jerome and Roa, Arkansas. So here we are with our ukuleles and guitars, if you can picture that. And we're singing all the way from Mississippi to Arkansas. But when we got closer and we turned into it, then we began to realize what was happening.
You see all the buildings, but around the building, huge, tall barbed wire fence, and they had guard tower with machine gun facing toward the camp.
The men who were manning the guns were Caucasian men. They had rifles with bayonets, and here we were with ukuleles. But then we trooped in, and there you could see men and women and children of Japanese ancestry.
The residents of these camps had spent 2 weeks of their ration to make okazu and food for the boys. So they said, wow, they spent 2 weeks of their ration. Wow, how terrible.
We tried our best to be happy, but how can you be happy in those circumstances?
As they met some of the boys' parents, the guy that he just licked and had a fight with, they came back very somber and very, very quiet in the bus. They weren't playing the ukulele and singing songs.
And I believe that what was running through the minds of most, if not all, was a question, would I have volunteered from that camp?
After seeing that, I felt, boy, they went through more than we did. Like we were free as a bird from Hawaii. None of this prejudice, none of this camp deal.
Then what happened is the cadre and the Hawaiians and everything meshed together. The esprit de corps completely changed. Instead of being animosity among them, it was complete friendship. The team was being built. The team that really became famous was being built because of that. And that's what happened with the 442.
I got the letter from War Department. This time they're going to organize a Nisei interpreters unit. Are you still interested in serving your country?
Under the direction of John Iso, they set up the first Japanese language school in the Presidio of San Francisco in November 1941. When the U.S. relocated all Japanese Americans from the West Coast, the MIS immediately moved to a temporary facility at Camp Savage. They eventually moved to a permanent location at Fort Snelling, Minnesota.
And the material that was given to us was not a general Japanese language course. It was geared for military Japanese language.
Also, they wanted us to know something about, they call Sorobun, which is the language that members of the Japanese royalty used or spoke or wrote, Sorobun. And that was very, very difficult to read, write, or understand.
And what they were trying to do is cram down within 6 months what you might have to learn in 4 years.
After the training is over, it's understood that I'll be sent to Pacific War Front to serve my duty. Eh? What if I meet somebody I know, or my relative, my classmate? So that was my big concern.
Unlike a typical military outfit, the members of the MIS were not organized as a single unit. They would be assigned to small teams of up to 14. In some cases, they worked alone. In all cases, they were assigned to various Allied units throughout the Pacific Theater. Individually, their tasks ranged from translation of documents, creating propaganda material, intercepting enemy communications, and interrogating prisoners of war. Collectively, they were the eyes and ears of the Allies in the Pacific.
GIs and front lines were trained. Whenever they came across a scrap of paper or a book or any piece of paper, to not destroy them, but to send them back to headquarters. And then we were organized to go through these, and that would be a major source of battlefield information.
So I look through and I find this little sheet. It's clean. All the other documents are weather beaten, and they're either muddy or bloody or both. And this one was clean, and I looked at it, and it just had a little sketching on it. And this little writing, too, kanji writing. I read the writing. It said they're going to attack at 10 a.m. and the date. I looked at it and said, hey, this is for tomorrow. They're going to attack us tomorrow.
It's like a puzzle. The individuals were each one of the pieces of puzzles, and by putting all the puzzles together, the people on top who had privilege to know all this information was able to see the whole picture. MacArthur immediately took to the idea of this information of the intelligence that was being gathered by the Niseis, and he used it to the fullest, I think.
General MacArthur would say of the MIS that never in the history of combat had one side known so much about the enemy prior to actual battle. One unit, under the direction of General Frank Merle, fought behind enemy lines in Southeast Asia. Their objective was to disrupt Japanese operations in that area. The MIS linguists who were with this unit, known as Merle's Marauders, had volunteered for what was only described as a dangerous and hazardous mission. It was estimated that the casualty rate for this outfit would be 85%. In one specific incident, the battalion that Roy Matsumoto was assigned to had become isolated for 13 days. With the Japanese regiment surrounding them and food and water supplies diminishing, Roy Matsumoto decided that he needed to find out the enemy's plan of attack.
Roy Matsumoto again crawled beyond the perimeter, and he overheard that the Japanese were planning to make a banzai attack the following morning at dawn. With that information, he crawled back.
But that particular night, I came back early and told him what's going to happen. So he called up an old man, a commanding officer, this was Matsumoto found out.
And with that information, he withdrew his men from the perimeter and established a new one. As the Marauders moved from their position, they booby-trapped the foxholes, and they waited. And at dawn, the Japanese struck. And they all charged up the hill, and they struck the position which was held by the Marauders the previous night.
They came back then at no resistance, see? Then so they decided to go up more, maybe. So they cannot figure out, no spur moment, they cannot figure out, This is not it, so maybe up there. They thought maybe 10 yards, but maybe another 10 yards.
And Lieutenant McLogan waited till they approached 15 yards from their position, and they opened up with all the automatic weapons available.
So they decided to, back up and try to get in a foxhole to cover. Then there was a booby trap, so that's hand grenade goes off and the tripwire, see? So then the reinforcement there tried to come up.
The second wave that was coming up saw what happened, and they hit the ground. And Roy Matsumoto, feeling that they might retreat to fight another day, rose from his foxhole, exposing himself, and he said,
"Totsugeki ni!" Then that's "Komen, susumen."
And as the Japanese were responding to Roy Matsumoto's command of attack, susume, susume, as he called it, one after another of the Japanese troops would expose themselves to our fire.
They thought, Japanese, so maybe one of the officers gave it, or NCO gave it. They don't know, couldn't see it. Never heard my voice before, but they understood exactly what they said.
When the battle was over, there were 54 bodies counted, 2 officers.
The good part is, in our side, no battle casualty. In other words, nobody got even a scratch.
The battalion would eventually reunite with the rest of Merle's Marauders. While Roy Matsumoto's tactics worked well on the front lines, many of the MIS worked away from the front, where they would use their language skills to interrogate Japanese prisoners.
The Marines at first didn't, use the Niseis. So they went into these islands blind,
Of course, some of the officers says, well, we have no need for them because we don't take prisoners. Well, if they don't take any prisoners, then we're not much use. But we explained to them why a prisoner could be useful. And it wasn't so much how many Japanese soldiers you could kill, It's how many American soldiers you could save.
The Japanese soldiers all expected to die. So the Army never had, like in the U.S. Army, they said never write anything, or when you get captured, don't talk. But then Japanese Army didn't have anything like that.
You're not supposed to be captured to begin. That was the greatest disgrace, you know. For a samurai warrior to be captured. If you're captured, you disembowel yourself. You put a grenade to yourself before you are captured, you know. Disgraces you disgraces your family, disgraces your nation, disgraces your emperor to be captured.
They would die before they become prisoners, but never realizing some of the people are so badly shot up that near death and they're being captured, you know. I mean, this situation exists. That's, you know, for them not to think that that would happen is kind of hard to believe.
And I start interrogating him, and he looked at me and he says, "You're a traitor." And I said, "I'm not a traitor. I'm an American soldier." And I said, "If we were to cut our vein, I know the same blood will flow. But it's a matter of ideals. You're fighting for your country. I'm fighting for mine. And it is my responsibility to interrogate you."
First, name, rank, and the unit they come from, where they come from, the village they come from. So I say, "By the way, what school did you attend to?" "Oh," they mention the name that Kishaba Shogakko. That's where the school I went to. Same school. My ears perked up. "Huh? Kishaba Shogakko?" "Yeah." They start testing one by one, detailed question. "Was there, in your school, was there school teacher named Sunsho Nakamura? Nakandakari?" They look at me. "How do you know Sensei Nakamura?" "Well, I tell you, I'm a graduate of a United States Military Intelligence Language School, so I know everything about you guys. Don't lie to me." Then I start questioning about myself and them. "By the way, in your class from Shimabuku, village of Shimabuku, was there a person by the name of Takejiro Higa?" "Huh? How do you know him?" "Then I tell you, I know everything about you guys. Don't lie to me." So, yeah. "Do you know where he is now?" One guy said, "I think he went back to Hawaii." I yell at them in Okinawa Hogen, "God damn, don't you recognize your own classmate?" They look at me in shock, you know. So, and they start crying. "Why are you crying?" "Well, until now, after this interrogation is over and our usefulness is over, you guys might take us over the hill and shoot them. Now, knowing that our own classmates on the other side of the fence, we figure our life will be saved." So we cry for happiness. That kind of hit me. So 3 of us grab each other's shoulder, and I don't mind tell you, we had a cry.
By the time we were at the end of the voyage to land at Naples, that was just about early part of June. I recall one incident there as we were unloading from the ships. There's a caravan of white troops that are going by on trucks. And these white guys would saw us and they would lean out from the back of the trucks. "One puka puka," which really meant that our reputation had been made ahead of time by the 100th.
The 100th boys are delighted to see them at the first moment. Then they berate them and kick them and in a sense, beat the hell out of them. "I thought I told you to never come over here. What made you do such a stupid thing? Why can't you listen to me?"
The 100th was assigned to the 442nd Regimental Combat Team under the command of Colonel Charles Pence. Rather than renaming them the 1st Battalion, they were allowed to retain its unique designation as the 100th. No longer was this an arbitrary designation, but one of distinction.
At the end of June, or I believe it was June the 26th, when orders came in for the 442nd to go into the line. This means to go into combat.
The first experience was in the place called near the vicinity of Belvedere.
Pence decides he doesn't want to use the 100th. So he put the 2nd and 3rd Battalion as the attack units, and we're in reserve. And he puts us quite a ways to the rear.
And there was a road separating the 3rd Battalion and the 2nd Battalion. The 2nd Battalion is supposed to take the high ground over here on the right of Belvedere. And this is what we did. We got up and took the high ground over here, but then there was a huge gap between the 3rd and the 2nd Battalion. And Belvedere, the 3rd Battalion is supposed to take Belvedere.
The Germans are attacking, the German SS Battalion is attacking full speed ahead. The 442nd and 442nd is about on the edge of total panic.
The 100th was called up, and they performed a very interesting flanking action around Belvedere.
B Company, Sakai, is leading the attack, and then right behind him is A and then C.
Rather than go straight forward through the 442nd line, we'd pull a end around, a Hail Mary play. We went around and behind the town of Belvedere in the mountain. And the Germans never expected us to do that.
And then when we went, we surprised the Germans, And you could see the Germans just throw their rifle and running,
By that time, the 100th was just about overwhelming this German force, which turned out to be an entire armored battalion. And eventually the pressure from our 2nd and 3rd Battalion and the 100th, who had just really blasted the German force there in one afternoon.
The thing worked like a well-executed football player. And we captured the guns, we captured Belvedere and 40 prisoners, and then we captured about 50 jeeps, German jeeps, and we got the enemy en route.
The 100th suffered that day 11 casualties. 7 wounded and 4 killed. We killed over 170 Germans. We destroyed 2 tanks. We captured their artillery and a self-propelled gun. I mean, we totally demolished that SS battalion.
The 100th had really shown their experience and their combat readiness. And the first Presidential Unit Citation went to the 100th for this particular action.
All of you Americans of Japanese descent have a right to be proud today. You have demonstrated true Americanism and true American citizenship on the field of battle. You have another right to be proud, for you have reached the high standards of American fighting men. You are always willing to close with the enemy. He has no bluff on you, and you've always defeated him. And let me tell you again, the 34th Division is proud of you. The 5th Army is proud of you. America is proud of you. And I know that whatever future action you go into, you will conduct yourselves with glory and bring about the peace that we are entitled to. Good luck to you, and God bless you.
The 100th continued to fight as a unit alongside the 2nd and 3rd Battalions of the 442nd until the end of the war. Together, they would eventually earn a total of 7 Presidential Unit Citations, the highest honor for an individual unit. For the next 3 months, the 442nd would help push the Germans into northern Italy. While with the Fifth Army in Italy, the 442nd enjoyed the respect of their leader, General Mark Clark. In September 1944, the 442nd was sent to France and assigned to the 7th Army under the leadership of General John Dahlquist. Dahlquist wanted to be the first general to reach Germany, and many felt he ignored some of the most basic rules of military strategy, and in doing so, jeopardized his own troops. They were sent to the Vosges Mountains in France, near the border of Germany. For the Germans, there would be no retreating. Hitler had given the order to hold their positions at all costs. The 442 was ordered to take the town of Bruyères that held a key road supplying German forces in France.
I don't think they realized what a difficult ground we had to traverse. And if it was a flat ground, that's one thing. There's 4 hills above Bruyères, and we had to take those hills for the town to be free.
Bruyères is a town way below the hill there, and so the 100th was assigned the task of entering the town, and we in turn was guarding the right flank up in the hill.
After weeks of intense fighting and heavy casualties, the town of Bruyères was liberated. The 442nd was due for a much-deserved rest off the line. Meanwhile, a battalion of the 36th Texas Division had pushed forward beyond their own regiment's ability to support them. As it turned out, the Texas Battalion had been surrounded by a German SS division. The press dubbed them the Lost Battalion, and their desperate situation was reported in the newspapers back in the States. Numerous attempts by the 36th Division to reach them had failed. General Dahlquist, fearing the loss of an entire Texas battalion, ordered the 442nd back to the line after only 1 day of rest. Many began to wonder why they would be called upon when there were other regiments available who were fully rested. Whatever the reason, the young men of the 442nd believed that if they succeeded in this rescue, nobody would doubt that they were loyal Americans.
And then we got a call. Everybody on your feet, we're going up. That's when we got that call to go up and rescue the Lost Battalion.
It was so dark that night that we took off. You couldn't see the hand in front of you. It was so dark.
We held on to each other's whatever it is, their coat tail or raincoat or whatever, so that we wouldn't get lost, and we followed them in until we made contact with the enemy.
And artillery shells, when they hit the tall trees, will burst. And the fragments, some might be as small as tip of your finger, and other might be chunks. They come raining down like bumblebees.
When you get a tree burst above you, you have no place to run. You might be standing against the trunk of a tree, but the burst comes from all areas, so you can't really protect yourself. I mean.
But I remember the guy came and says, "You can't stay here, he's dead already." You know, my medic is dead already. And I don't know why I want to stay there, do something.
So it's a very difficult thing, because here you pin down and all hell is breaking loose, right? They're just shooting at you, because this is the final stand by the Germans. They're up on the hill. We're coming up the hill, just like shooting fish in a barrel.
So then we decided there's only one way, is to assault it physically.
We opened up the hole so that the other 442nd 2 battalions could go inside and get the guys out of there. And we held that place so that they can do their job.
Because of a limited access terrain there, there's only two company could make the assault.
Then, from the forest, we saw the infantry guys just standing and started to go. You know, shoot from the hips and just go.
That's the day that Barney Hajiro, got up and led the attack, actually.
So when the German machine gun, the first one, they want to surrender, but I calm them down. I don't give them. There's no prisoners, at that time, because you don't have a time. So I go after the second one. I pin them down again. Like me, I sidestep. I pin them down again. I wipe them out. Then the third one, I was going after, they cut me down.
And so we just went hog wild, and we yelled our head out and charged and shot at everything that moved or didn't move, and then just made all kinds of noise and yelling, and finally we broke through, you know.
I Company was first to make contact. It was our first platoon, had 2 scouts out there. And
I'm sure I saw something over there. So he snuck up some more, and it turned out to be that Lost Battalion guy.
They were expecting tall Caucasians, or howlers we call them, to rescue them. But when they saw us, only 5 feet or 5 feet 2 or whatever, the tallest we had.
Looked like a bunch of little kids with American helmets on them. And I didn't know what to think, really, that these people are rescuers. They're the ones that broke through.
There was no great rejoicement, joy, hurrah, or celebration. These guys just came out with long beards and dirty and grimy. Obviously, happy as hell to be out of the hole.
And they shook our hands and thanked us and everything. And some of them says, "Oh, I'm glad to see you Japs," you know. Well, I know he didn't mean it that way, but that's what he just said. It just came out. And found out that there was only 230 survived that surrounding. And we decided, well, golly, 230, but we lost 800 trying to make this rescue. And so that was a terrible price that we paid, you know.
Following the rescue of the Lost Battalion, General Dahlquist ordered all of the men of the 442nd into formation. As all of the able-bodied men of the 442nd gathered, General Dahlquist reprimanded Lieutenant Colonel Miller. "I ordered that all the men be assembled." Lieutenant Colonel Miller replied, "Yes, sir. All the men are what you see." The 442nd had almost 3,000 men as they entered the Vosges Mountains a month earlier. Following the rescue of the Lost Battalion, there were over 2,000 wounded or killed. The 442nd would be reassigned to southern France for what became known as the Champagne Campaign. 5 months later, with their ranks replenished, they would return to Italy again under the command of General Mark Clark and the 5th Army. For the 6 months while the 442nd was in France, the 5th Army had tried to break the Gothic Line, the final German line of defense in Italy.
We thought when we got to Marseille, we were going back to the States. We thought, oh boy, they're going to let us go home. But in Marseille, they put us on this boat that said, this boat won't go across the ocean. So we landed in Italy, secretly.
Since the 442 was in the Italian fighting campaign before, they brought the 442 back to finish the war in Italy. And the last stronghold that the Germans had was the Gothic Line.
The plan was for the 442nd to climb up the sheer face of Mount Folgorito, a mountain peak almost 3,000 feet high. They would move out at night in total silence and surprise the enemy at dawn.
You know, we didn't want nothing to rattle our dog tags and that. We made them so that they wouldn't rattle, so the Germans couldn't hear us on top.
Something came crashing down. And only about 15 feet in front of me. I thought this thing in the dark just go roaring down the hill. And I said, oh, somebody must have stepped on a big rock and it got loose and rolled down. But it actually hit somebody and took him with them. Yet the guy didn't even make a peep, because if he yelled or screamed, he could have given away our position.
We got up on top and the Germans were asleep. We caught them. You know, they thought nobody would never get them. No way.
They coordinated attacks, so everything went off at the same time. And then we start hearing gunfires and things like that, but it was so little, you know, along there that they took this whole thing.
It was hoped that the 442nd would be able to break the German resistance at the Gothic Line within 1 week's time. As it turned out, the 442 needed only 31 minutes.
That was the main fighting right there. Once we captured all them Germans in them trenches and all that and on the forts, we had them on the run, and they were running. They were running toward the north.
We're ready to attack Alessandria, which is a town just a little north of Genoa. And we were on top of a hill looking down into the town, and we could see the German soldiers walking around. And here we're ready to attack the town and wondering, hey, what's going on here, you know? Then, just about that time, we saw a lot of the bombers, B-17s, B-19s, fly overhead, throw a lot of these little leaflets. And that was, we picked up off the ground and said that congratulations that you have seen the war end in Italy.
By the end of the war, the 10,000 men of the 442nd, including the 100th, had received over 18,000 decorations. That made it the most decorated unit for its size and length of service in American military history. On the morning of the attack of the Gothic Line, Private Sadao Munemori's unit was pinned down by murderous gunfire. He made a one-man attack and knocked out 2 machine guns. When a German grenade rode towards his comrades, he dove for the explosive and smothered the blast with his body. Private Munemori saved the lives of 2 men at the cost of his own. For these actions, he was awarded the 442nd's only Medal of Honor. Although many others were recommended for the Medal of Honor, they were all turned down. Prior to the attack on the Gothic Line, the 442nd Regimental Combat Team's Field Artillery Battalion, the 522nd, was detached from the 442 and sent to Austria to assist with the final push into Germany. The 522nd Field Artillery Battalion had built an outstanding reputation for their accuracy and fast rate of fire. It was this reputation that had created a demand for their services. As they crossed the border into Germany, they came upon a subcamp of Dachau. There they would witness evidence of Hitler's final solution. At the time, they were not prepared for what they were about to see as they approached the Nazi concentration camp during the last days of the war.
They were already talking that the Germans may give up, but they're still shooting, so they ain't giving up. This is where we came up on Dachau. And all of a sudden we came up to this camp, all barbed wire, nice double fenced barbed wire. There's nobody around because nobody went in there yet. We drove up, the M35 commander back off into the barbed wire fence, and he went right into, so everybody followed suit. That's where, after a while, you see those people start straggling out from their barracks and unit.
We came across hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of so-called prisoners in the black and white prison garb, shaven heads, sunken eyes, hollow cheeks, bare skeleton, roaming aimlessly around the countryside.
They were suffering from malnutrition, and they were very hungry. There was many carving away strips of meat from a carcass of a dead animal.
And the rest of them, medics picked them up, brought them to hospitals, the one that couldn't move or anything. Even they came to our sea battery in the kitchen, and they begged for food. And actually, you wasn't supposed to give them food.
I remember somebody throwing something to eat, maybe a candy bar. Took a bite of it and come right up. They couldn't stomach that. And the worst one was when the medic tried to locate the vein, intravenous vein. Everything is collapsed.
Some of us entered the camps. And let me tell you, the stench was so terrible. The acrid smoke of burning flesh. I mean, indescribable, unbelievable. They found huge ovens, still warm. And next to the huge ovens, they saw lots of 50-gallon drums filled with ashes. Now, guys with even stronger constitutions went behind the compound, and there was a railroad siding over there. They saw what they thought were neatly stacked cordwoods. But upon closer scrutiny, these were corpses.
At first, you know, it's such a big thing and such a big shock that you don't immediately react to it because there's so many emotions that are running around your head.
As I said, one of the greatest ironies of World War II happened there in Dachau when members of a persecuted minority, the Japanese Americans, many of whose families were still interned in the United States, reaching out to help members of another persecuted minority, the Jewish people of Europe. And what are our crimes? One for being Jewish and one for being Japanese.
I had a tremendous feeling of guilt. And my guilt wasn't for me. I didn't do that, you know. But my guilt was for mankind.
If you try to compare American camps with the German camps, it was vastly different. You know, the American camp was for the duration of the war, whereas the German camp was for extermination of Jewish race.
While the war had ended in Europe, the United States was preparing for an invasion of Okinawa, an island south of Japan that could be used as a staging area for an American assault on the Japanese home islands.
There was a lieutenant, and during the course of interrogation, he pushed a small matchbox in front of me, and he said, "We're developing a weapon of this size that could destroy a city." And I said, "You gotta be kidding." And he said, in fact, they were working on this weapon. So I said, "What is the name of the bomb?" He said, "Genshi Bakudan." Genshi means atom or atomic. When I returned from the POW camp, there were two officers who were newly assigned. So I immediately asked them that if they had heard of an atomic bomb. And I explained that it was a small bomb, the size of a matchbox that had the capability of destroying a city. Well, they both looked at each other and rolled their eyes, and he says, "Grant," he says, "we just finished OCS. We have been exposed to the latest weapon, and there is no such thing." And they dismissed me. When the bomb actually fell, I said, "My God, atomic bomb." I did commandeer Jeep, and I went back to the POW camp, and I called the person, and when I mentioned to him, he covered his face, and he says, "The war must be over."
When the emperor was going to speak, we knew right away something important was coming up, because we knew beforehand from the intercept that something big was going to happen.
On September 2nd, we got up
to go out to Tokyo Bay to board Missouri. In Tokyo Bay that day, there were all the battleships there. All the guns were pointing towards the sky, indicating peace. And we boarded the destroyer, went to Missouri, anchored mid-Tokyo Bay. Finally, when Colonel Mashbear, who was the commander of Addis in Brisbane, escorted the Japanese delegation, and there was dead silence, just like you could hear a pin drop. They were ushered to the middeck of Missouri. At that point, all the gaiety disappeared, and there was one of cruel silence of animosity by the sailors and military towards the Japanese delegation. And I thought then, and I repeat my recollection, that of the military art, the Bushido, the ways of samurai, because I used to do kendo. And looking at them was so pathetic that all that thing vanquished on the deck of Missouri, and that the nation, the people of Japan, was truly disgraced. The war correspondents wanted to see Hiroshima, the effects of A-bomb. And on the plane, everybody, the press particularly, was very anxious and eager to write the story of the century, that is the A-bomb bombing of Japan. But when we landed and we drove into Hiroshima, the whole city was like a tornado hit the island, and there was an eerie silence, as though the air was sucked out of the city, in that there was no noise because there's no activity. There's only one streetcar running, and the whole area was nothing but flies. But as I followed the newsman, and we hit Red Cross Hospital, and when we went into the Red Cross Hospital, the scene was horrible. And what I saw were women and children and old people, not many soldiers. And when you see the effects of A-bomb melting the faces off the kids with red flesh hanging out with pus all over, with flies, the press, even though they're so eager to capture the story of the century, they just stopped and taken aback and moved out, and they couldn't go forward. And on the way back on the plane, it was complete silence, because the newsmen, as they reflected on the horrors of A-bomb, just were so moved that they just quiet and kind of reflected on what to report to the world. And that was Hiroshima.
After the surrender of Japan, the MIS worked as translators in the war crime trials and assisted in the reconstruction of the country. During the war, the MIS worked to protect Allied soldiers. After the war, they worked to help the people of Japan rebuild.
The first thing I did was I visited all of my brothers who got killed, the parents. The first thing I did.
When I saw my father, we just grabbed each other and just danced in joy. It was a funny thing. Yeah, we right there, and I come home and he grabbed me and we just jumping up and down.
As the veterans were returning from the war, their families had begun the process of leaving the internment camps and rebuilding their lives. 40 years later, Congress passed House Resolution number 442, issuing a formal apology to the internees for the government's actions during the Second World War. In the mid-1990s, Congress opened an investigation citing possible racial reasons why so many Asian Americans were turned down for the Medal of Honor. And in 1999, the first monument on the U.S. mainland was dedicated to the Nisei soldiers. The monument stands in downtown Los Angeles as a permanent reminder to those who served abroad during World War II.
Today we pay tribute to these extraordinary men and women, Japanese Americans who fought in World War II, served in the U.S. Armed Services, with this, the Go for Broke Monument.
These men went to fight for America, and they fought with uncommon valor at a time when America questioned their loyalty and incarcerated their families, especially the mainland families. And so that's the story this monument tells.
Thank all of you for being here on this profoundly important day. For their numbers and length of service, the Japanese Americans of the 442nd Regimental Combat Team, including the 100th Infantry Battalion, became the most decorated unit in American military history. We recognize them today with our nation's highest military honor, the Medal of Honor. As sons set off to war, so many mothers and fathers told them, live if you can, die if you must, but fight always with honor and never ever bring shame on your family or your country. Rarely has a nation been so well served by a people it had so ill-treated.
There's a lot of us that never came home. But I think in thought, they are home. The guys who went overseas gave their life to prove that we are Americans, that we all got to be thankful to.
Even though I'm not too keen about these kind of things, talking about these things, you know, I figure I owe it to those guys, because in telling my story, I could be telling some of their stories too. Their stories need to be told. Yeah, I know some guys, they don't want to talk to other people about it. I tell them, yeah, you know, when you die, what you know goes with you, and it's gone forever. At least if you tell somebody, it'll be here for the next generation.
The Medal of Honor is awarded to Private Barney F. Hajiro. The Medal of Honor is awarded to Private Shizuya Hayashi. The Medal of Honor is awarded to Second Lieutenant Daniel K. Inouye. The Medal of Honor is awarded to Technical Sergeant Yaiki Kobashigawa. Medal of Honor is awarded to Technical Sergeant Yokiyu Okutsu. Private Sakato's extraordinary heroism and devotion to duty are in keeping with the highest traditions of the military service and reflect great credit on him, his unit, and the United States Army.